The Buffalo Bills hired a new special teams coordinator. Plus, what can the Bills learn from the Eagles? And are the Chiefs primed for a big regression? We got a lot to cover today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, welcome in. 3 different topics I want to cover today. We'll start with the Buffalo Bills' new special teams coordinator. Then I want to offer some thoughts on the Eagles and the Chiefs and the Super Bowl and tie that all to the Bills. And I originally didn't plan on getting into much of that, but as I started to get questions from people for Herd Mentality, I realized that maybe there is an appetite for me to share some thoughts on the Eagles and the Chiefs and how that all would connect with the Bills. So we'll do that here for you today. But let's start with the Bills getting a new special teams coordinator. And the Bills, obviously, in order to get a new special teams coordinator, they had to fire Matthew Smiley. And originally, Sean McDermott didn't plan on doing that. During his year-end press conference, he acknowledged the challenges that Smiley's had over the last couple of years, but said he was committed to him for 2025 and even said that he was confident that they would improve. And so you had to come to terms with and accept that Smiley was going to stick around after 2 very poor seasons. And Sean McDermott really stuck his neck out there for the guy, only for a few days later, over the weekend, we get the news that the Bills fired Matthew Smiley. And, of course, when that came through on Sunday, I was left asking myself the question, well, what changed, Sean? I mean, you just committed to the guy. You just said you were confident. What happened here? And the more I thought about it, I landed on, well, surely there's a replacement lined up that they feel would elevate Matthew Smiley. And that's what turned out to be the case. The Bills had somebody in mind. At least it certainly appears that would be the new piece of information. They found somebody they like better and dismissed Matthew Smiley. Probably a decision that should have been made regardless. You needed to change that leadership component of your operation. And the Bills welcome Chris Tabor. And Chris Tabor is a very, very experienced and accomplished and highly regarded special teams coordinator. Let's talk about him. So his first job in the NFL, 2008 through 2011, he's the Bears' assistant special teams coordinator. Then he gets his first opportunity to be the lead special teams coordinator with the Cleveland Browns, and he's their special teams coordinator from 2011 through 2017. He's there 7 years. He survived 3 different head coaching changes. So he was hired originally, and then 3 more head coaches were hired, and Tabor stuck around every time. Then in 2018, he becomes the Bears special teams coordinator, holds that job through 2021. Actually filled in for Matt Nagy at the time, was the head coach during the COVID season. Nagy had to miss a game, and Chris Tabor was the head coach for that game for the Bears. And then he was the Panthers special teams coordinator 2022 through 2023. And when they fired Frank Reich in 2023, Chris Tabor was the interim head coach for Carolina. I think that was like a 6-game deal where he was the Panthers' interim head coach. So interesting that while he's got a very accomplished career coordinating special teams, there's been 2 different organizations that when they needed someone to fill in and be a head coach, they had this guy do it. And I think that says a lot about Chris Tabor. The results have been very good, very consistent for his units. He oversaw big-time returners in Devin Hester in Chicago, Joe Cribbs in Cleveland. Surely those are names that ring a bell for you. Some of the best returners, I mean, really, of the last 30 years, Devin Hester ever. Oversaw Phil Dawson, big-time kicker for a long time with Cleveland. The results have been very good. Perhaps the best way that I could tell you how consistent the special teams units that Chris Tabor has coordinated are with the Pro Football Focus special teams rankings. And I know that there's a lot of wide-ranging opinions on PFF grades, and I mostly overlook them. But I think it's at least a consistent way for us to discuss performance. And if you look at Chris Tabor's special teams rankings, they're very good. Now, in 2023 in Carolina, his last season, not so much. They ranked 21st. That was also the year where Frank Reich lasted 11 games. Bryce Young's rookie season, he has to be the head coach. You can kind of understand why maybe a lot of components of the Panthers operation didn't perform well. The previous season, Carolina was number 6. In 2021 with Chicago, they were 7th. In 2020 with Chicago, they were 7th. In 2019, they were 7th in Chicago. And then his first year in Chicago in 2018, they were 19th. And so they go 19th to 7th to 7th to 7th. And then before that, I don't have the Pro Football Focus special teams rankings, but he had that long run, 7 years in Cleveland. And like I mentioned, survived 3 different head coaching changes. Highly regarded special teams coordinator, great resume, 13 years as a lead special teams coordinator. The NFL Players Association actually voted him as the number 2 special teams coach in the NFL in 2023, and over 1,000 special teams players voted that gave them the information to make the rankings, and Chris Tabor finished number 2. And so this feels very much like an upgrade. Matthew Smiley had 3 years on the job. The first year was terrific. The next 2 were very bad. Chris Tabor has a long resume of consistency, high-level performance, overseeing big-time impact special teams players. It's not hard to look at this and feel like the Bills got an upgrade. And I'm optimistic, I'm hopeful, and I'm basically very excited to see him turn things around in Buffalo. And so a couple of nice additions to this Bills coaching staff already this offseason, and Chris Tabor for special teams, Ryan Nielsen on the defensive side of the football, Jason Rabrovich, the assistant D-line coach. We talked about those guys last week. Some nice additions here, and hopefully they're all micro deposits in Buffalo being able to improve as a team and ultimately get over the hump. All right, speaking of getting over the hump, let's talk about 2 teams that got over the hump, the Eagles and the Chiefs. We'll talk about the Eagles next. I have a lot of thoughts on that operation, some of the characteristics that made it a Super Bowl champion, and maybe some ideas along the way for what the Bills can extrapolate and learn from. And then we'll talk about the Kansas City Chiefs and potentially a big regression there. Folks, be sure to stick with me. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth-quarter comeback, you could stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, I never feel like I miss my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can Get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's talk about the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. And like I said, I didn't plan on getting into this. I know that there's a lot of Bills fans that had no appetite for the Super Bowl at all, boycotting the game. And I just didn't know if there'd be a lot of interest in me sharing thoughts. And I think in coming out of the game, maybe there was a lot of interest. So maybe this is a little bit late, but I'm happy to share some takes here. So Philly beats Kansas City. And let me tell you about my Super Bowl journey, because I definitely was never not going to watch the game. I am annoyed, right, that the Chiefs were in there. I wanted the Bills to be in there. But I never really found it within me to be sour about it, because the Bills have had their opportunities to beat the Chiefs. They just haven't done it. And so it didn't really change anything for me, because if there's disappointment, it's not that Kansas City's in there. It's that my team can't knock them out, right? That's where it comes down to. And I love football. I'm going to watch the Super Bowl. And so I went into the game thinking to myself, I don't really care who wins this game. And I talked myself into, well, if Kansas City wins, maybe it does help me come to terms with the Bills, because legitimately you're talking about a three-peat. You know, they'd have won 4 Super Bowls in 6 years, and you come to terms a little bit more that, hey, your team and your quarterback's not in those moments. And, well, oh, shucks, it's because the greatest collection or the greatest team or greatest run by a team in NFL history just happened to be there along the way. And so I thought that would be a coping mechanism. But I start watching the game, and I see the things start to unfold, and you kind of realize that Philly's got it that night and Kansas City doesn't. And yeah, I did. I took great joy in watching those Chiefs struggles and Philadelphia winning the game. And so I went in thinking one thing, and throughout the process of watching the game, I certainly landed at a different preference and thoroughly enjoyed watching Kansas City lose. Now, it doesn't, I mean, it's a temporary moment of, oh yeah, that's fun to see. It doesn't really change any level of disappointment that I have that the Bills weren't in there, but it was nice to see some Kansas City sadness. And so the Eagles win this game, and boy, they whooped them, right? Big time butt whooping. There's no question about it. And I think it's not hard to see the characteristics of that Eagles team and how they were able to win the game. I mean, they had a dominant 4-man pass rush. Dominant. Rush 4, wreak havoc, drop 7. That's the dream. If you can rush 4 and get pressure and drop 7 and play tight, man, you're going to be a great defense. And so they won with their 4-man rush. They only blitzed one time. 90% zone coverage. 90% zone coverage. So for all the soft zone critics out there, boy, that's a tough moment for you, because that's what they ran, Philly. And I think soft is just a weird word to put in front of zone. It's just zone coverage. And so, yeah, they just had this collection of defensive line talent that was able to wreak havoc. I think another important ingredient for the Eagles' win was their ability to win down the field with their receivers. Big time completions, big clutch completions down the field to Devonta Smith, to A.J. Brown, to Jahan Dotson, getting wins down the field against Jalen Watson, the Chiefs corner, Trent McDuffie. They were able to beat him down the field. And look, Trent McDuffie's a great player, but he's not a guy with a ton of length. And so you got a guy like A.J. Brown, or a guy with some real length and size, you should be able to win that matchup down the field. And the Bills tried it. They gave Keon Coleman 2 chances to win one-on-one. And I mean, I don't really think Josh gave him a great ball to catch, but I don't think him and Keon were on the same page. I don't think Keon was in good position to win those passes. So dominant four-man rush, zone coverage, wins down the field, and they're able to win in a big way. And I think as I've reflected on Philadelphia and the team that was built, I think they're a great champion. I really do. They're a great champion. And their general manager, Howie Roseman, has really elevated himself as the premier general manager in the National Football League. He has been able to have some huge draft classes, especially recently. Some big-time hits. And talent really falling to him. Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Those guys fall to them in the late first and then second round. Those are the number 10 and 11 players on my draft board last year. If you listen to my coverage leading up to the draft, you know how much I love those players. The year before, they get Jalen Carter, who was like probably the best player in that draft, and he slides a little bit. Then they get Nolan Smith at the end of the first round, and I love Nolan Smith. He was the number 7 player on my draft board. He winds up going like pick 30 or 32 or something like that. And they're able to really find some big hits. Jordan Mailata, big-time left tackle in the 7th round. Landon Dickerson, impact interior offensive lineman on day 2. Of course, the Devonta Smith acquisition. Defensive side of the football, Josh Sweat in the 4th round. Reed Blankenship is a good starting safety that they got late. Just a ton of major hits in the draft. Not singles, not doubles. I mean, legit home runs. They've also had some major trade wins, whether it's draft trades where they stockpile draft capital and suddenly they're picking way higher than they should. Had some big wins in that capacity. The A.J. Brown trade was obviously tremendous. The Chauncey Gardner-Johnson trade, obviously tremendous. Some big trade wins. And even some bargain bin free agents along the way. Redemption stories like a Zach Bond, who was a good player at Wisconsin. He gets drafted by the Saints. They can't figure out how to use him. He signs a low-cost deal to go to Philadelphia. He finishes 3rd in Defensive Player of the Year voting. Mekhi Becton was laughed out of town as a bust tackle pick for the Jets. Goes to Philly. He plays right guard, and he becomes a steady player that elevated that offensive line. I thought they've done a masterful job of getting ahead of needs. They've seen players like Jason Kelce leave and retire, and they had Cam Jurgens waiting in the wings to step in. Fletcher Cox, retires, great player for them for a long time, and they've got Milton Williams and they've got Jalen Carter ready to go. James Bradbury flakes at corner. They wind up being able to get a Quinyon Mitchell. Just feels like they have the right stuff in the right place at the right time, and they've got ahead of needs, and they've just been right. Howie Roseman's been right. And what's very interesting about the whole Howie Roseman story is that it was not always this way. Howie Roseman has been with the Eagles for a long time. His first 7 years as a general manager, his teams didn't win a playoff game. 7 years, no playoff wins. Most organizations would kick that guy to the curb. They stayed committed. He's able to learn through a lot and has delivered really 3 different teams that have been to the Super Bowl. The Nick Foles team with Carson Wentz, that team, and then the team that won a couple of years ago, and I think there's a lot of differences in the team that just won it. And they've been creative with trades. They've been creative with how they manage their salary cap. They are very willing to defer money, kick it down the line, restructure players, and really squeeze what they can out of the cap. The Bills do that too. They have lots of expensive players. Jalen Hurts is a big-time paid quarterback. They got 2 handsomely paid receivers in A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. 3 massively paid offensive linemen, Elaine Johnson, Landon Dickerson, and Jordan Mailata. Dallas Goedert is a paid tight end, or Goddard is a paid tight end. Darius Slay is a paid corner. But they've also been able to fill in the blanks around them with impact players that they draft, the redemption stories that really work out, and they've built a very complete team. But I just admire how they stuck with it. 7 years as the GM before a playoff win, And there was at one point a huge narrative that Howie Roseman can't draft. I think there was like a point in time where the only Pro Bowler he drafted was Carson Wentz. And we saw how that flaked out. It took Andre Dillard in the first round, traded up for him. He's a bust of a tackle. Picked Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson. Derek Barnett and Sidney Jones weren't the dudes they were drafted to be, right? So it's not like he's nailed every single thing, but over time he's learned a lot of lessons, and he's certainly separated himself from the rest of the pack, and it's been cool to see. And I also want to make a comment about their head coach, Nick Sirianni. I think that he is perfect in every way for Philadelphia. And he's a very unique personality. He yells at the fans. His kids are with him during press conferences, and people complain about that. And, you know, he's an offensive coordinator turned head coach that doesn't call plays as an offensive guy. That's so different, right? These coaches, especially on offense, are very, you know, egomaniacs. They want to, hey, I'm an offensive guy. I'm going to call the plays. It's not what he's done. It's not who he is. He's a unique guy for one of the most unique football towns out there, right, in Philadelphia. He matches the city. Matches it. And you hear him talk about things that Sean McDermott talk about, how the guys love to play for each other, that there's a deep-rooted connection in the locker room where guys are tight and, you know, they love each other. Like a lot of those core principles that exist in Buffalo. And so obviously it all comes together at the right time. Find their X factor in Saquon Barkley to really elevate. And I think they're a great champion. I really do. I'm very impressed with operationally how this team came together, how it's been coached. You know, even looking at last year in 2023, that team fell apart. Absolutely fell apart. And they were able to replace both coordinators, bringing in a Vic Fangio and a Kellen Moore. You know, they lose Fletcher Cox and Jason Kelsey. You feel like those are big leadership losses. They wound up taking a major step. That team was terrible down the stretch in 2023, but they were able to learn from their lessons, put it all together, get another chance at the Chiefs, knock them out. They're Super Bowl champions, and I couldn't be more impressed. And hopefully there's some things here that the Bills can apply and really solidifying that four-man rush, staying kind of committed to what's been working, but also find those areas in the margins where you can make up ground and be right, you know, be right. You got to start really being right about your player acquisition. And that's what happened, you know, eventually for Howie Roseman, and built one heck of a Super Bowl championship team. All right, Kansas City Chiefs, regression coming. I'll talk about it here on the other side of it. Folks, be sure to stick with me. Football season may be over, but basketball is in full swing, and there's no better way to stay in the game than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. This week, I'm looking at Jason Tatum for more than 29 points. The best part, Prize Picks is quick and easy. You can set your lineup in less than 60 seconds, and their fast and secure withdrawals mean I can get my winnings in as little as 15 minutes. Plus, I love their weekly promos like Taco Tuesday, where you get discounted player projections for even better value. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, let's talk about the Chiefs. And some of you may know this, some of you may not, but I do work for Bleacher Report. And every single Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I host a Buffalo Bills live stream. It's 25, 30 minutes where I'll have a topic and I'll talk about that topic. And a lot of times it's pretty similar to things I would discuss on this podcast. But there's also an interactive feature where, you know, people watch these streams live and they'll ask questions. And I love that. That's what I really enjoy about it. You know, I can monologue about the Bills every day on this podcast. I love that live interaction, people sharing thoughts and takes, and I get to comment and, you know, host a live stream, and we have a lot of fun. That's every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern time. Download the Bleacher Report app. They just revamped the whole thing, and you can watch that, and you can participate, and I'd love for you to be there. But this past Monday, of course, the day after the Super Bowl, Bleacher Report picked the topic, you know, and they don't do that often, but once in a while they do, and they said, hey, we'd like you to do a stream on 5 reasons why the Buffalo Bills can win Super Bowl 60. That's the one that's coming up. And so the 5 points that I made, and I really want to focus in on the Chiefs point, were, number one, Josh Allen sets the floor for the team, right? In a transitional year, the Bills got to the AFC Championship game, had a great chance to go to the Super Bowl, and that says everything about Josh Allen and how he is the window. And I do think that there was a lot of transitional elements and that the stability around Josh Allen year over year will allow them to build and evolve. So number one was Josh Allen. Number two was that I don't think the Bills are facing a daunting offseason. I think it's an important offseason, but I don't think they have to do major things, right? Their most important free agents, Rasul Douglas, Amari Cooper, DeMar Hamlin. I really don't think the Bills should bring back any of them at all. We'll talk about that later, but I feel like they're players that are reaching their expiration point, especially Cooper and Douglas, and I would not commit significant resources to them. And so when you look at the offseason, you're like, of the expiring contracts, the three most important ones are Mac Hollins, Ty Johnson, and Reggie Gilliam, like a depth receiver, a depth running back, and a fullback. All right, you're going to be okay. And you don't have to make a whole bunch of moves for cap compliancy. I think there's a very straightforward what you need to do. You need a field stretcher at receiver. You need defensive line impact. You need a starting corner, and you need depth, right? There's nothing super crazy about this offseason. It's important, and you want to do things to help get over the hump, but this isn't like, oh my God, they got to do 8,000 things here. Number three was that it's not year one for the coordinators. Joe Brady has a full, this is his second year. Bobby Babbitt's not a rookie defensive coordinator that, not only is a rookie defensive coordinator, but a lot of coaching staff changes around him, a lot of defensive personnel things around him. You lose Milano in preseason, then you lose Taron Johnson week one, then you lose Terrell Bernard. You have injuries all year long. Rousseau and Jones are your only starters that don't miss a game due to injury. And I thought it was a challenging situation for Bobby Babbitt as a rookie defensive coordinator. And I thought, all right, well, the Bills will be better positioned next year with that not being true, right? A season under their belt. And then I talked about developing young talent and offensively, how you've got guys like James Cook and Khalil Shakir and Osiris Torrance and Dalton Kincaid and Keon Coleman and even Spencer Brown and Connor McGovern, players that are key players for you that I don't think are at their ceiling yet, and you could expect a lot more from them. So before you even get into all these different players from outside the team that you can bring in to help, you got a lot of players within that are going to improve and make you better that way. Defensively, guys like Greg Rousseau and Terrell Bernard and Christian Benford and Cole Bishop and Dorian Williams, developing young players as well on that side of the football. So it was Josh Allen, not a daunting offseason, year two for coordinators, developing young talent. And then number five was that I think the Kansas City Chiefs are facing a really, really critical offseason, and I think they got a lot of challenging things to figure out. So while I don't think the Bills are facing a daunting offseason, I think the Chiefs are. And I think there's a potential where there could be a level of regression. And what I mean by that is not that I think that the Chiefs are going to bottom out and that they're not going to be a good team. They're going to be a good team. But I don't think that they're a 14 or 15 win team. I think they're probably a 10 or 11 win football team. And let me explain that. First of all, in the Super Bowl, you absolutely saw their biggest issues get them eliminated. Massive holes at offensive tackle, edge rusher, and cornerback, and you can maybe even say wide receiver. And what has really bothered me in the fallout of the Bills losing to Kansas City has been this flawless portrayal of Brett Veach, the Chiefs general manager, as this guy that just crushes everything, doesn't get anything wrong, and is running circles around Brandon Beane. And Brandon Beane absolutely has had his misses, and it's disappointing that his team wasn't better positioned to take advantage of where the Chiefs are weak like the Eagles were. I'm not absolving Brandon Beane. We're talking about Brett Veach, okay? Can we compartmentalize and acknowledge that? This is a conversation about Brett Veach. But this idea that he's flawless and Brandon Beane just falls all over himself is crazy. It's ridiculous. And the Chiefs got eliminated because of Brett Veach's shortcomings in not being able to deliver a championship caliber offensive tackle situation, edge rusher situation, or corner situation. And those are big, important things. You talk to a lot of people, and I felt this way too. When you watch that Super Bowl loss for Kansas City, it felt a lot like the Tampa Bay loss. And what was the biggest problem against Tampa Bay? Their offensive tackles were garbage. Well, here you are. Your offensive tackles are still garbage. So huge problems at offensive tackle, edge, and corner. So that's stuff that they got to figure out, right? They got to figure that out. They got a big-time list of expiring contracts. Now, they only have $11.5 million in cap space before they start making moves, whether that's creating more cap space or, like cutting players or signing anybody. So they have $11.5 million in cap space. This is their list of expiring contracts. Trey Smith at guard, that's a $20 million a year guard. Justin Reed at safety, quality starting safety, that's probably every bit of at least $8 million, $10 million a season potentially. Nick Bolton, their middle linebacker, team captain, he's an expiring contract. Tershawn Wharton, important piece of their defensive line. Their only defensive tackle that's under contract next year is Chris Jones. So Derek Nottie, Mike Pennell, all these supporting players at defensive tackle, none of them are under contract. Charles Omenihu, expiring contract on the edge, and then they got these veteran receivers in DeAndre Hopkins and Juju Smith-Schuster. They're expiring contracts as well. So you got limited cap space. You got 3 huge holes to fill already at tackle, edge, corner, and potentially receiver. And you've probably got to make some hard choices with your other players like a Joe Tooney and a Travis Kelce. They probably should move on from those players because there's massive cap saving opportunities. And while that makes sense, I think those are players that, especially Kelce, I think is kind of his best football is behind him. You probably need to take those opportunities. I don't know what they will do, but the point being though is that puts you in even more of a position of finding, new pieces. And so I just think they got a lot to figure out. Meanwhile, they're in a division that had 2 other playoff teams in the Chargers and Broncos. They got a pretty tough schedule. They obviously play their own division. They also play the Bills, Ravens, Eagles, Commanders, Detroit, and Houston. That's all of the divisional round teams from this year. And yeah, I think that it wouldn't surprise me if they were a 10 or 11 win team as opposed to a 14 or 15 win team, as they have some things to work through. And so the more I look at this AFC, and obviously this is middle of February, we haven't even seen moves being made to change the dynamics of any team. Right now, I really look at this AFC, and I think it's a Bills-Ravens conversation. I think the Bills and Ravens both had to do their reset dynamics this coming year, and the Chiefs are going to have to do that this year. And obviously, the Ravens and Bills still had great seasons through their own transitions, but I think there's more to figure out in Kansas City. And obviously, they've got Andy Reid and Steve Spagnuolo and Patrick Mahomes and Chris Jones. That's a outstanding nucleus of or pillars of your organization that's going to give you a great chance. And I'm not saying that they can't go to the Super Bowl next year. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibilities. Of course it's not. But I don't think that they're going to run away with the AFC, and I think they're going to have to fight for it in ways that they really haven't. And so I think it's a really ripe opportunity this coming season for Buffalo. Really ripe. Now, I think the Ravens are the biggest problem, and the Bills will have to deal with that along the way. But as I consider where I find optimism for the Bills in 2025 and potentially being the Super Bowl 60 winner, what the Chiefs are facing in the coming months would have me concerned if I was a Chiefs fan. And again, I'm not predicting the demise of the Chiefs. I think they're an amazing operation, but I think there's a lot for them to figure out in the aftermath of this Super Bowl loss. All right, folks, there you have it. We talked about a lot of things. Chris Tabor, the new special teams coordinator, thoughts on the Eagles, thoughts on the Chiefs. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you come back. We got a lot of content coming this week still. We're potentially going to do herd mentality this week. We want to talk O-line and wide receiver. In the Substack, we got a lot cooking there. I did my on Tuesday, I released my vertical passing offense deep dive where I gave a ton of metrics, put up entire film reel out there of every deep throw that Josh Allen had and really talked about the dynamics of the vertical passing offense. Please check that out. Link in today's show notes to see the herd mentality Substack. I think I'm going to do an article here in the next day or so on James Cook and the contract dynamics, because there's a lot there. And he came out on Tuesday night and did an Instagram live talking, or had a pinned comment about $15 million a season. So want to flesh all that out in a Substack article for you this week. So tons of content all year long from me. I hope that you are taking advantage of it and enjoying it. All right, folks, that's it for today. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.